If you are looking for a gift for loved ones this year who have an interest in true crime, why not consider heading over to crimecon.co.uk and grabbing yourself some tickets to the June 2023 CrimeCon event in London. I will be there, along with some of the leading names in true crime, and I would love the chance to meet and chat with some of the listeners. You can get 10% off your tickets by using the code CULT at the checkout today. A very big warm welcome and thank you to my newest 3 patrons this week, Alex, Alexandra and Marilyn. I'm so grateful for your support and hope that you find the access to exclusive and ad-free content helpful. Thank you all so much. For just £1 a month, you can support me at patreon.com/The Cult Vault to get early access to ad-free and full-length episodes each week, so you can listen to these interviews in full. If you enjoy the podcast, please consider heading over and signing up to help the show. And now, on to this week's episode. I'm your speaker Casey, and this is The Cult Vault. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, an Indian mystic and founder of the Rajneesh movement, a group that grew rapidly in the 60s and 70s, with disciples being iconic and instantly recognisable for wearing warm colours like oranges, purples and reds. The Rajneesh movement became popular with seeking individuals from all over the world who came to the ashram in India to meet the so-called enlightened guru, who was changing people's lives. The progressive attitude towards self-improvement, liberal sexuality, and chasing the path to enlightenment would eventually lead to 2,000 disciples fleeing India to join their Rajneesh in Portland, Oregon. On a vast and open stretch of land, the disciples who referred to themselves as sannyasins built an entire livable community, a truly impressive feat. But what lurked beneath the surface of this movement that preached peace and love? What occurred within the confines of this movement, within its many locations, is truly some of the most despicable experiences humans will ever endure. Not only was it encouraged at all levels within the movement, Rajneesh himself was one of the most heinous abusers of all. Many people suffered at the hands of this charlatan, who has been since successfully rebranded, taking on the new identity of Osho, or Osho. Despite Rajneesh dying in the 90s, Osho is often quoted by intellects, by academics, by the entertainment industry, by those who have no idea that Osho is in fact Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, a monster among men. Many people suffered at his hands, notably the children. Here to talk to us today about her experiences growing up in the Rajneesh movement is psychotherapist and counselling practitioner Sam Jahara. In part 1 of this mini-series, Sam speaks about the birth of the movement, her parents' initial involvement, and what happened to herself and other children inside this abusive and tumultuous environment. In part 2, Sam discusses the downfall of the Rajneesh empire, the scandals and the crimes linked to the Rajneesh movement, and her escape from its clutches. Sam also discusses her incredible work in the field at Brighton and Hove Psychotherapy, and what people can be doing to recognise the Osho name, to prevent it from having any power or positive significance in this age, as it shouldn't. Now here is Sam. So hello Sam and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I'm looking forward to this conversation after hearing your talk a few weeks ago with Mark Torrender on his YouTube channel Talk Beliefs. And as we discussed this week, there is a spotlight on this particular movement with lots of information coming forward. So it's prevalent to be having these conversations more so at this time. Would you like to start by introducing yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, sure. I'm really happy to be here. So thank you for having me. So I'm Sam Jahara. I am a psychotherapist. I am also an executive coach. I work in East Sussex, mainly Brighton. I grew up in the Rajneesh cult. My parents got involved when I was very young. Yeah, as a result of that, these experiences were very formative for me, and they also very much contributed to me training as a psychotherapist, because attachment issues and all the experiences that you have throughout childhood, I really wanted to understand them at depth. And so here I am talking to you.
And now you're trained and you're in a place to understand and recognize those things and then help others to unpack in the same way that you have.
Hopefully I do that with others. I don't necessarily work with cult survivors. I think that's very specific work, but I think I could be in a position to work with cult survivors. But there's also a very particular specialism that is to do with cult recovery, which I don't profess to do.
And you mentioned that you're in the UK, so it's nice. It's a change for me to speak to somebody in the same time zone. Usually I'm trying to work out all types of things, especially with daylight savings and clock changes and all that good stuff that we still do in this day and age. But your accent is really an amalgamation of many different accents. Is that a product of your moving about as a child, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. Moving about as a child, but also living as an adult in different countries. So I was born and grew up in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And I moved around a lot as a child as a result of my parents getting involved with Rajneesh, later called Osho. So I lived in different European countries. I lived in America. In my adult life, I lived in Germany, the Netherlands, Australia. So I moved around quite a lot. So this is the most settled I've been in my life.
Wow. Is it by choice that you've decided to stay in the UK? Because there are some amazing countries that you've been to.
Yeah, I know, I know, right. Yes, I am. And I never expected that, because the most difficult part of my childhood was actually here.
Oh, wow.
Yes, so I had very bad memories from being in the UK as a child, and it's very ironic that that I have settled here. So my husband is Anglo-Dutch, and he was already living here when we met, and so we decided to build our life here, and training as a psychotherapist in the UK is actually, in my opinion, in Europe, the best place to train. So yeah, here we are. We stayed.
We haven't had anybody on the podcast to date who was a child growing up in this movement, but this isn't a group that you were born into. So I wondered if you could talk the listeners through how that journey began for you.
Yes. So the movement, I was born in 74, and the movement started, with more Western disciples in the early 70s. And it started really taking off in the late 70s and early 80s, which is when my parents joined. I was about 5, 6 years old. My brother was 1, 2 years old. You were talking about your children just before, and yeah, you can only imagine what it would be like for a child that young to go into something like this. And I don't know if many children who are born in the movement, I'm sure there are children who are born in the movement, but fortunately I wasn't. And so I had 5, 6 years of, let's say, normal life before it all changed.
So you had some kind of scope of typical childhood before you were funneled into this mayhem. I don't know if that's an appropriate word to use.
Yeah, mayhem is a great word to use, I think. Chaos. Actually, chaos is a word I use a lot because it was pretty chaotic. Yes, and I think those 5, 6 years were actually very important. So when you talk about being born, I can only imagine what it must be like to be born into a certain doctrine of this kind. Yeah.
So with you having some reference points to typical childhood and then becoming more and more and more involved as a family in the Rajneesh movement, especially as the movement grew, how was it that your parents decided to join up and follow the movement in the first place? Was it a dual decision?
Well, I wish I had been a fly on the wall to go back and kind of listen to the conversations that must have taken place in terms of their decision. What I remember, and what, because these things you have to piece together. There's no 100% accuracy, but the narrative that I grew up with and that I checked with my parents is that it was very much led by my father. But they both went into it. They were both into doing kind of self-development workshops, and one called the Fisher-Hoffman process, which you must have heard of. And yeah, it's very cathartic, and I think it appealed to a lot of new disciples of Rajneesh as well, or vice versa. I think there was probably a cross-pollination of some kind. And it was the 70s, so my parents were young. My mother had me when she was only 24. And so, yeah, they were in their 30s, early 30s. They were young, they were curious. They were looking for guidance for sure. I think they started a family way too young and were very unprepared for life and for the type of responsibility that they had.
For anybody that hasn't tuned into the previous episodes that we've done on this movement, or who hasn't seen the pretty popular Netflix docuseries Wild Wild Country, or read or heard other parts of media that have explored this movement as a subject, could you give us a brief summary of the sannyasins, of the leader, how it was founded and how it grew and developed? And then we can kind of talk about at what point you entered into that journey of the group's history.
Yes, so I am going to give my perspective on this because it's very much my take, and then there is the sort of, I think anyone can go and access the factuals, but I think like many other movements of this type, it usually begins with a man who believes he has special powers and then manipulates others to believe the same. Not saying that there aren't women who do the same, but most of them are men. And I think what was probably, I don't know if it was unique to him, but he used a lot of very powerful women to recruit and to seduce disciples. He was, especially when more Westerners started to come to see him, he saw a real potential there to use these women to go out there and to recruit more Westerners. And it was usually people with money, no surprise there. And Westerners felt attracted to his messages about sexual liberation, I mean, free sex. It's very ironic because Indian society is so sexually repressed, and coming from him, it was very appealing because it mixed Eastern philosophy with Western therapies. And he was really a master manipulator, I would say. And he was very sexually unresolved himself. It was called a sex cult, but the man himself was hugely sexually unresolved. He abused his female disciples, and he was in no position to be preaching or talking anything about sex, in my opinion. He was very well read and very well educated, and he appealed to the educated middle classes with money. And I think because of that, his power grew and grew throughout the 80s, resulting in the eventual move to Rajneeshpuram, which was a huge narcissistic endeavor. Like, it was a grandiose, crazy thing to do, and very, very, it's portrayed on that documentary to some degree. There was a lot more going on than was portrayed, but yeah, it was quite well portrayed, I think. And the whole thing imploded, and as these things often do, and thankfully they do implode with a catastrophic end. But unfortunately, his disciples continued to immortalize him to this day. So his organization did a tremendous job of brainwashing people and covering up their criminality.
it's kind of a flash in the pan, this group, in terms of when we speak of multi-generational adults, there could be second, third, fourth generation adults with things like the Jehovah's Witnesses and high demand religious groups that have been established for a longer period of time. So really, the success that Rajneesh was able to muster in such a short amount of time, it did, as you said, it did implode, and makes me wonder what could have happened if things would have happened a bit slower. Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh just had something that really, as you said, appealed to people in that period of time. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall to really understand and recognize what that thing was, because people talk about him having a spark or him having this type of power or energy or charism. And I don't feel like you can see that from videos of him or audio tapes of him. I feel like it's something that you had to experience in person as somebody that was searching for a higher power.
Well, we posed this question actually as a group. We met with a cult expert, let's say, and we actually would kind of pose this question as a group. And what she said was that the answer is that there was nothing really different about him. The only difference was that he was extremely good at what he did.
I think that's a really, I think sometimes when to try and understand things, we search for something profound or something that would explain like a phenomenon or something that would explain how somebody was able to accomplish what they did in such a short amount of time, especially at the expense of other people's well-being.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is it Occam's razor. Sometimes the most simple explanation is the explanation, and in this sense it was just he was a master manipulator, and that's as deep as you need to go with that conversation.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very accurate answer. You know, people when people go on about there was something very special about him, and you know, he had this energy and da da da, and I can't buy into that at all. There was nothing special about this man apart from the fact that he was very good at manipulating people and did it in a very sophisticated way. And therefore, he appealed to a certain type of disciple who then also went out and let's say, spread his message in an equally very sophisticated way. And so the whole thing became quite sophisticated in a way that maybe tells this group apart from some other groups. But there was nothing unique about the man.
I've just finished watching the Deep End Hulu documentary about Teal Swan, and there was so much built up about her being in her presence and the effect that she could have on people, that the euphoric state that or trance-like state that we have seen people enter in these group environments, people were already in that space before they had met Teal Swan. And it's easier for me to be able to kind of recognize and understand that because she is actually active right now. So perhaps that same thing was happening. As you said, he had people go out and recruit or proselytize, evangelize people for him at that point. And so the reputation spoke for itself before people even had the chance to see for themselves whether he did have this effect on people authentically.
Yes, and there's also something called projection and transference, which is very powerful. If you know, the bigger somebody gets, the easier it is to project something onto them that has nothing to do with who they are, but with a particular longing that is unresolved in the person who's looking for something, like a parental figure, like a solution to their problems, like an end to suffering. You know, they project all this hope onto, and the 70s was very much a time for that. I think, you know, people were looking for answers, they were questioning, they were searching, and these gurus started to appear more and more. I mean, there's so many gurus in the 70s, and people were very receptive to that.
And the Eastern mysticism and influence, I suppose, at that time would have been something that was different, was new, hadn't really been explored in the 60s. And I watched a documentary on the Source family recently where one of the really devout followers of James Baker, the leader of the group, said that he was searching for something as a casualty of the 60s. And that really sounded like quite a profound thing, especially if you consider the politics and the disenchantment and the changes in people's affiliation with Christianity at that time and the rise in feminism and all of the drugs. And then the war ends and the music starts to change and everybody's kind of like, well, where do we go from here? So we're at the kind of back end of the 70s, and you're born in 74. You're around 6 years old when your parents decide to truly commit to the Rajneesh movement, and your uprooting and shifting around begins at that time. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. That it began, I don't know, 1980, somewhere around there. Yeah, it was quite it was a total change, a very sudden change, and very, yeah, it was a huge upheaval, I would say, because for a child, I mean, children really do need stability and safety and security. And we had quite a stable life, I would say, up to that point, although I'm sure there was a lot of inner turmoil going on for both of them. But for me as a child, it was very important to have my family, to have my pets, to have my grandparents around, my friends. I mean, this is kind of what holds a child psychologically, I think.
And you mentioned that some of your more difficult experiences happened over in the UK. Was it at this time that you and your family became part of the first intentional community made of sannyasins?
So what happened was that it all happened around the time when Rajneeshpuram was being built. Okay, and my parents wanted to go to Oregon to Rajneeshpuram, so we basically left everything and bought a motorhome in America and lived in that motorhome for about a year. I went to 3 different schools throughout that year, went and spent a summer festival in Rajneeshpuram. My parents visited the ranch, as it was called, several times. So after that year in America, I went back to Brazil, was left with my grandmother for 6 months, whilst they went back to, I think my mother went back to the ranch. My father was kind of, their relationship was very, it was in turmoil, because you can't join a movement like this, where you're being encouraged to have lovers, and that the nuclear family is very much spoken against. The stuff that was being professed was not conducive to family life at all. So then they started doing that, going to India, going to Rajneeshpuram to be with Bhagwan or Rajneesh, and then we went back to Brazil, and then my mother and my parents decided to go to Europe and live in the communes there, and that was the time when all these different communities started popping up, and it was quite an enterprise, actually, because they ran so well. They had their discos, their cafes, their restaurants, their schools. It was an incredible enterprise.
I was going to ask what your education looked like. Moving from country to country, education is going to look different from each place. And depending on how long you stay in one area, you might end up repeating things you already know, or taking part in classes that are way too advanced for your level. And if you're talking about intentional communities, there's the chance that you're not going to any type of official education facility, like a public school. But then does the middle class aspect play into this, where you might expect to have teachers involved in these communes who can offer some type of formal education? What did that look like for you?
education was all over the place during those 5 years. I missed out on education big time throughout the commune times. We had very little education. There was no, I don't remember any books or any homework or any formal education. What do you think of as formal education? I remember in the UK school, we just all sat around a sofa and somebody read us a story. There were no desks, there was nothing like that. What I do remember very well is work. So most of our time was spent working, and there were some small communities. Like I lived in a commune in here, the Netherlands, for about 6 months, and that was quite small, very intimate, and there was more care for the children then. The adults seemed to like children and enjoy spending time with children, but I wouldn't say the education was very formalized at all. We were still, everybody dressed in red and wore these necklaces with his picture on it, and it was a time of emotional expression was encouraged. So you had a little bit of education, then you had some leisure time, and then the afternoon, or you're working, and suddenly somebody would start shouting at you in the kitchen, like just as if I just think there was such a lack of understanding of what children really need, and what can be very frightening for children. They were just doing what the hell they wanted to do, and we were just casualties, really.
I found it interesting reading Ronit Plank's book when she comes back about her mother going to follow Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh, and Ronit being left with her father, wondering why her mother didn't want to come home, and what it was that Rajneesh was offering her mother that she couldn't as a child offer her mother, and lots of difficult themes that I think Ronit dealt with so wonderfully. But what she always wondered was, where are the children in the documentary? Are there children is my mum caring for other people's children while she's with Rajneesh? Why can't I go as a child and be with my mum and be with Rajneesh? And there was really never anything that could give us the answers to that until these conversations with yourself and Lily Dunn. Only recently now that we're able to kind of get that perspective and understand those things. So it never would have occurred to me that you would be wearing the colours of the sun, the oranges and the reds, and that you would be required to wear a mala with Rajneesh's face on as well. So you were really all just treated as children, as kind of smaller disciples of Rajneesh.
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely. We were all required to surrender to him. He was the higher power, for sure. And in response to wondering where the children were in let's say in the documentary, for example, the answer to that is that children were a hindrance to the movement. Yeah. And so people were really encouraged to leave their children behind. Yeah. And nobody wanted children around. And this is this is an important point also, because he was encouraging people to get sterilized. So many people got sterilized. I mean, people got sterilized en masse. And a lot of people regretted that. But, it goes to show how far you follow somebody, how dangerous. And there's also a case of reverse sterilization where, a woman has died, a former Rajneesh, sort of a child that grew up in the movement. So, people were being sterilized very young because that was perceived to be a good thing. So it was almost like, I don't know, something to be proud of. I had a vasectomy. I've been sterilized, so it was almost a hallmark of the cult, and children were a hindrance for the movement because it was a reminder that people had obligations and responsibilities, right? And also, a child is, it requires your full attention. And so if you give your full attention to a child, you can't give your full attention and devote yourself to the guru. I mean, it's very perverse. It's very, very perverse. So, but they couldn't get rid of children altogether. And the more the movement grew, the more people came into it because of their parents. And but I think no one in charge wanted children around. They couldn't really stop it either. And because the workforce, they needed the workforce, and the workforce brought their children with them. You know, not everyone could just leave their kids behind. This is, you know, it's crazy. But there was a lot of neglect for sure. There were no rules for children, which I'm sure some children appreciated very much, but there was also very random, unfair punishment without explanation. And yeah, and when the larger communes closed, or when Sheila closed, when it all imploded and the communes started closing, a lot of children ended up in Oregon, just either accompanied with their parents or without, actually.
It's interesting to look at the role of sexuality in different cult-like groups and recognize how the message around free love and sexuality can be from one extreme to the other, but the result is always the same for leadership, whether that is in the children of God encouraging intergenerational relationships, which I'm saying in air quotes, and encouraging people to have more and more and more children to grow the numbers of the movement. The message around that, as opposed to let's all be really open with our sexuality, but the results of having lots of sex means children, which we're not really happy with. So we're going to control that by encouraging people to have vasectomies or to become sterilized. The results of those two things are still the same. If you're constantly pregnant and you're constantly reliant and dependent on the group and you have no money to leave, and everything is focused towards this message of pleasing God through growing your family numbers and pleasing the men around you, the message, it's kind of like the polar opposite of doctrine, but really the same effect in terms of loyalty and devotion to leadership. And I always feel like that's really interesting to look at, especially because Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh wanted everybody to be so open with their sexuality, which I only learned recently really meant between a man and a woman. Because I assumed from watching the documentary that he just kind of wanted everybody to love everyone, but that's not actually the case.
Oh, no. It's a very good point, because I wasn't intending to talk about that, but the whole movement was extremely homophobic. And when, because it also happened around the AIDS time, Rajneesh was extremely paranoid about AIDS, and gay people were so ostracized. And when I was living in Medina, just imagine that one of my jobs was to stock the boxes of condoms and latex gloves in each of the rooms, because the instruction came from the top. This is a deadly disease, and everybody has to have a test. So the kids also had AIDS tests. And everybody, and the instruction was, when you're having sex, you have to, you cannot kiss on the mouth, and you have to wear latex gloves and condoms. And yeah, so that's just an aside, really.
I feel like that is something else that wasn't truly reflected in the documentary, and I've heard from people that there were a lot of things that were captured well, that were given to the audience in a fair light. But as somebody that didn't really know much about this movement until I watched the documentary, if I didn't recognize then that it had overtones of homophobia, then that can't be something that was fairly reflected in the documentary. And it's only through survivor testimony that I'm able to really understand that Rajneesh wasn't happy for same-sex couples to exist within his movement.
No, he wasn't. There was, and in fact, there was a strong undercurrent of homophobia throughout. Lesbian and gay relationships were frowned upon. It was seen as an abnormality, even though there were plenty of people who are gay and lesbians. And so that's an interesting one. But when I say sophisticated, there's a lot of sophistication in because it professed to be led by women, empowered by women, but actually it was extremely patriarchal and misogynistic, and the amount of abuse that took place and abuse of women that took place, it's very messed up.
I think that speaks to Rajneesh as a master manipulator in that way as well. Really, in my conversation with Erin Robbins, I was really able to identify that he positioned himself as somebody who wanted to give power to women, and that nothing could be accomplished, enlightenment couldn't be accomplished unless it was happening through the women. But actually then those women had no critical thinking skills, and everything that they said they were coached into saying without recognizing what was being done to them. So that's that kind of inner circle in itself, which we're only really learning about now in the last couple of years. Because again, the documentary positioned Rajneesh as somebody who was celibate, which we know now was absolutely not the case.
No.
It really is kind of similar to NXIVM, I think, in the way that there was an inner circle of women who were being horrifically abused. And I often wonder if that level of abuse was encouraged at all levels within the movement as well. Is that something that you would be able to speak to?
You mean abuse of women, abuse of children? Now more stories are coming to light. The detail of the stories are coming to light. We all knew, when I say we all the other former kids I speak to, we all felt and we saw and we witnessed the abuse that was taking place. But the individual stories are emerging more and more now, that people are kind of think there's an age of reckoning, right, with sex abuse, historic sex abuse, collectively as a society. And abuse was taking place. I mean, financial abuse, spiritual abuse, emotional, psychological abuse. There was physical abuse of children, for sure. In the communes, one of the headmasters, who fortunately left just before I arrived, was a sadistic pedophile, and the stories of people have been abused by him are horrific, absolutely horrific, and it was all covered up. And in fact, he went on to open another school. Another Rajneesh school.
In an interview I did with a lady who had been in contact with somebody who has opened their own institution off of the back of Rajneesh's teachings, as somebody who was one of the earliest followers of Rajneesh, it only occurred to me in that interview that somebody might sit in front of somebody like Rajneesh, and instead of not understand the coercion that is being inflicted onto them, will actually sit there and think, this is amazing. I'm going to take these systems of coercion and apply them in my own environment.
Yeah.
I think we always want to see the best in people. So it never occurred to me that the cycle of abuse can continue in that way. So I kind of had a moment of realization that the fallout of Rajneesh in leadership probably still extends in the Osho international movement, which is very much still ongoing today.
Yeah.
So I don't know if his influence will ever really die out, which is quite a scary thing, really, considering that he's been dead for a while now.
Yes. I think he died in 1990, and it's still alive. I don't know if it's alive and well, but it seems to be, because there are plenty of Osho therapists out there practicing dangerous types of therapies, because they have no training, and they also are very indoctrinated by a narcissistic psychopathic guru, which is very worrying. And also his books are widely sold. Waterstones is stocking Osho books, so he's gone very mainstream, and people are posting all sorts of Osho quotes, on the internet, as if he was this kind of wise guru. I mean, obviously, there's a huge blind spot there when it comes to that, and I think it has to stop. And I'm just kind of really secretly and not so secretly hoping that that there's a second reckoning and that the whole thing implodes all over again.
It's strange that, because I don't feel like Waterstones would stock books about Jim Jones and his most powerful revelations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned that something you do remember from your childhood was not so much the education, but more so the work. So labor trafficking is something we talk about a lot in these episodes and in these interviews. Would you say that, given you were moving around a lot, that human trafficking in terms of labor trafficking of children was something that was quite prevalent in the movement?
I can't speak to that because I moved around mostly with my parents. I was also left without my parents at the commune schools. I would have to think carefully about that, but I would certainly use the word exploitation of children in that respect, because we were very young to be doing the sort of labor that we were doing at the time. And it was all couched under work meditation, so it was all for your spiritual growth. In fact, there was no growth that was taking place whatsoever, because I was constantly unhappy and tired. And there were children who were working, sort of teenagers who were working all day, 12 hours a day, and this is no way to spend your life, and you're without education and just working, doing sort of hard labor in a kitchen, standing up all day. And this is I think that's very abusive.
What would be the consequence for children who said that they didn't want to take part in any of these expected chores and work commitments that were being put onto you?
That's a very interesting question, actually. Nobody has ever asked me this question. And I would say that I don't think that was an option. Because I had plenty, I ended up in the sort of the headmaster's office plenty of times, feeling very unhappy with my situation. And I was very unhappy because I was in a different country. I was in a strange place with people who were, mostly quite strange and hostile and very self-absorbed and in a daze. There are pictures of this man, Rajneesh, everywhere. That you lived communally, so you had to wear. They told you what to wear. And also there was a limit on how much clothes you could have, how many pairs of shoes, how many, clothes, etc. The food was strange. The environment was really quite hostile, I think, for children. There were children from all over the world, and too many children, too few adults, too few trained adults, with any pedagogic training. There was, it was a pretty grueling structure of work, and there was really no option. And if you were unhappy with any of it, you were sent to meditate and to do dynamic meditation, which for children is extremely confusing, So you're already exhausted from working, cleaning toilets, working the laundry, working the kitchen, and then you're meant to go and do some more physical stuff to cure your unhappiness. So nobody saw that as a problem with the environment that children were in. For them, they were so absurdly blinded to the whole thing that they thought that the environment was wonderful. They were providing the best environment that you could provide for children, and that Osho knew all about child rearing, for sure, even though he didn't have any children. He had no knowledge of child development whatsoever. He was just making up as he went along. And so it was all supposed to be very wonderful, and we were supposed to be the lucky ones and the chosen ones. My God, you're supposed to feel so grateful that you were there at such a young age, and that you're liberated from all this conditioning. In fact, you're not even going to get the conditioning. You're just going to be indoctrinated, with the right doctrine from the start. So it was just very messed up.
That is the end of part 1 of this mini-series speaking about the children of the Rajneesh movement. In part 2, I will be speaking further with Sam Jahara about the implosion of the Rajneesh movement, along with Sam's escape and journey into a professional career helping others in need. To contact Sam, please visit brightonandhovepsychotherapy.com or follow the link in the episode description. For ad-free full-length episodes, you can sign up at patreon.com/thecultvault for only £1 a month. To get in touch with me, you can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter and Instagram @cultvaultpod. I'm your speaker Casey, host of the Cult Vault podcast.